We're looking at the importance of our inner life, our inner well-being, integrating our outer selves and our inner selves. We spend a lot of time maintaining our outer selves, the bit that we present to the world, the bit that we interface with other people, but often we don't spend a lot of time tending to our inner life and our inner well-being, and that can impact the way we engage in the outer self. And today we want to look at just what the benefits are of emotional health are. Last week we looked at some of the symptoms of not having an integrated life. These are just some of the things we threw up on the screen last week. You may resonate with some of these different aspects of symptoms in your own life that you might see. And again, this series isn't about creating guilt or creating shame. It's about helping us stop and reflect and think about, am I tending my inner life? Am I thinking about my inner life? And so you might resonate with some of those symptoms that we looked at last week. Why do we get stuck? Why do we get stuck when it comes to our inner life? Well, you come to church, you hear lots of talks, you hang around people, you read your Bible, you give, you serve, you study, you tell your friends about Jesus, but sometimes that doesn't penetrate deep into the person of who you are. You might find yourself still having deeply rooted behavioural problems that don't seem to want to go away in your inner life, problems that seem entrenched, untouched by Jesus in some way. We can find ourselves doing a sort of a list Christianity. We want to go through all the list of do's and don'ts, things that we feel like we should do as Christians, things we feel like we shouldn't do as Christians. But you might still have an increasing sense of guilt or a sense inside you don't measure up. You might have a sense of kind of an imposter syndrome, that you're going through the motions. Why is it hard to follow Jesus? Why is it hard to see a deeper change in our inner lives? Well, one of the things we can look at today is the impact of culture. We live in a culture, and that culture is the water that we swim in, and it can really impact us, and it can really affect us as followers of Jesus. Back in Paul's day, there was a letter written we find in the back of our Bibles, a letter called Revelation. It's a very strange letter. We tend to steer away from it, full of all sorts of strange imagery and metaphors. And the letter was written by the Apostle John around AD 1995, written to the church generally. It was a letter that will be carried around from church to church. And Christians were suffering persecution. They were suffering persecution, particularly in modern-day Turkey and Asia. And John wrote this letter to them to try and tell them about the kind of end times, what was going to happen when everything kind of gets wrapped up in God. But it's full of all sorts of weird and wonderful imagery. Their writing style is what we call apocalyptic, which really means end times writings. And I want to quickly look at a section from it today where John tries to describe the culture that these Christians find themselves in. The word used in there is the beast. The beast is used to describe culture. All sorts of different metaphors around that word and the way it's used. But the NT scholar Richard Buckman, he talks about John picturing the Roman Empire as the beast. And this is the entire Roman Empire, the culture, the economy, the military might, everything that kind of encompassed the Roman Empire, described as the beast. Rome proclaimed herself as the eternal city. Rome offered security, it offered order, it offered influence, prosperity. And Rome was subsuming all these other nations into itself to form the Roman Empire. The Apostle John, he writes this in Revelation. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. They also worshipped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? So theologians, some of them thinking here that the beast is this symbolism of Rome, the Roman Empire, the culture in which many Christians found themselves. And many Christians were tested by living in this culture. Rome demanded your allegiance. If you're going to be part of the Roman Empire, it demanded your allegiance. And if you didn't submit to the authority of Rome, you could be persecuted, you could lose your privileges, you could lose your job, you could lose your reputation, you could lose your income, you could lose friends. So a lot of pressure coming to bear on early Christians who were part of the Roman Empire. And trying to find a middle ground when you're living in a culture like this is very hard. Trying to balance the values of Jesus while equally balancing the values of the culture that you find yourself in. Some people just got assimilated into the culture of Rome, and their faith kind of got crushed out of them because of the Roman Empire. Other Christians stood against the culture and paid the price for it. So when we think about the beast in the early Christian church, the culture of the beast in the early Christian church, what is the kind of beast that we're experiencing now in culture? If we were to think about our beast, the culture that we now live in, what are some of the things that we see in the culture that we now find ourselves, the water that we now swim in? How do we resist culture? How do we allow our faith to flourish while culture is all around us? John writes this, he says, this calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people to resist the culture of the beast. So we live in a capitalist culture. We live in a technological culture. We live in a modern, global culture. And the internet links us all globally, all over the planet. And this is the beast that we face today. This is the water that we swim in. This is the culture that we're trying to prosper in and develop in. What are some of the core values of our modern day beast? I couldn't resist bringing this chap back for another week. So what are some of the core values of the culture that we live in? I've just put some ideas down here. Happiness is found in the things that you have. So the more stuff you have, the more you can accumulate, the happier you'll be. So our culture is continually pushing stuff towards us all the time. Algorithms are continually pushing stuff down your media devices to you. You know, if you click on a greenhouse, you'll see greenhouses forevermore. Whatever you might click on, you know, it'll be pushed towards you, because if you buy this thing, you're going to be happier than you are now. You should get all you can as quickly as you can. So basically, you know, the rush to try and assimilate as much as possible, as quickly as possible. The early retirement dream is what many people are chasing, you know, to free themselves from responsibility. So get as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and often at the expense of other people. It doesn't matter who you tread on to get that stuff, you just need to get it for yourself as quickly as you can. And linked to that, security is found in money, power, fame, status, and good health. A huge drive at the moment for health products to try and help you hack your health, because happiness is healthiness. So essentially at the moment, that's where you find your security, in these different things. Above all, seek pleasure, convenience, and comfort. More convenient lifestyles, more comfortable lifestyles. And I think this is a key one. You're not responsible for anyone but yourself. So as long as you're happy, as long as you've kind of set your stall out, as long as you've got what you need, then you don't really have to worry about anybody else, because we live in an independent culture. That's the nature of the beast around us. We should be responsible just for ourselves. That idea of community and community responsibility seems to be gone. You should fear and discriminate against people who aren't like you. And that's really, I think, a massive part of our growing culture. Tribalism is growing in our culture. If we don't understand somebody, if we're not like them, we should fear them and we should discriminate against them. And God is increasingly irrelevant to modern everyday life. You know, it's a nice thing to have. You know, spirituality is a nice thing to have in a segment of your life, but really God isn't really relevant to how life works anymore. AI is our new God, isn't it? AI is our new thing that we put our hope and our trust in, even though it lies all the time. We planted a church in Hales Owen, and that church has now been planted by somebody else, if you ask AI. It's replaced us with another couple, which is great, but not true. So, you know, don't always trust what AI is telling you. Now, that's some things I've put down the screen. You might have a whole load of other things that you identify as the culture that you're currently part of. And often we're not aware, really, of how this culture is subtly shaping us, is subtly shaping the way, is shaping our inner life. Rather than letting God shape our inner life, we're letting our culture shape our inner life. You eat, you drink, you drive, you shop, you play, you raise your families, you come to church, all within this culture that is around you. And being immersed in a negative culture like this can really feed that beast within us. It can really feed our inner life rather than allow God to feed our inner life. And we know We know this because we know there's an inner struggle within us. We know we're wrestling to do God and to do life well at the same time. Most of us feel that inner struggle, feel that something is adrift. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 7, he writes of his inner struggle. I want to read from the Message version of what he says. I'll pop it on the screen for you. But I need something more. For if I know the law, but still I can't keep it, and if the power of sin within me keeps sabotaging my best intentions, I obviously need help. I realize I don't have what it takes. I can will it, but I can't do it. I decide to do good, but I don't really do it. I decide not to do bad, but then I do it anyway. My decisions, such as they are, don't result in actions. Something has gone wrong deep within me and gets the better of me every time. It happens so regularly that it's predictable. The moment I decide to do good, sin is right there to trip me up. I delight in God's commands, but it's pretty obvious that not all of me joins in that delight. Parts of me covertly rebel, and just when I least expect it, they take charge. I've tried everything and nothing helps. I'm at the end of my rope. Is there no one who can do anything for me? Isn't that the real question? And so Paul here putting language to that inner struggle that we feel within ourselves, trying to integrate our inner selves and our outer selves, knowing externally what Jesus is calling us to, but then finding internally that we still struggle to reconcile that. And we see a lot of this inside ourselves, don't we, if we're honest? Sometimes we're afraid to look inside because we don't like what we see. Sometimes we don't tend the inner life because we don't like what we see inside ourselves. We're afraid to look. And sometimes we're afraid to let God in because we're not sure what he'll do if we do let him in. You know, what will he want to do within us if we do let him in? Some of these things are so part of us, have been part of us such a long time, that we fear change. We fear letting God in. We fear being vulnerable. Amos came and gave me a word at the end of worship today. The word was bravery. You know, he said he felt God calling us to be brave. And it does take bravery and courage to allow God into the inner parts, to deal with the inner parts, the inner parts of us that are broken. As Paul says, something's wrong deep inside. And we can't fix ourselves by just squeezing God into a segment, a Sunday segment or a different part of your life. God can't get to grips with this stuff if we just put him in a segment of our lives and just say, stay there and don't move. We all resonate with Paul, don't we? Something has gone wrong deep within us and we can't fix it on our own. Paul goes on to say this. The answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. Jesus can come and bring change. He acted to set things right in this life of contradictions where I want to serve God with all my heart and mind, but I'm pulled by the influence of sin to do something totally different. Paul recognized that Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the one that can bring integration between our inner and outer lives. And that's why the gospel is the greatest news we'll ever hear, the best news we'll ever hear. Because God can come and put us back together again on the inside. He can set us free from the beast from without and the beast from within. He can come and do the work that's needed. But if we're going to engage in deep transformation, it will take time, it will take energy, it will take bravery, it will take courage, it will take vulnerability. If we're going to let God in to make us whole, to weave us back together, to weave our spirituality and our emotional health back together. So what might good emotional health look like for us? A bit of a list again for you. Naming, recognizing, and managing our own feelings. Sounds really simple, doesn't it? But most of us aren't very good at it. You know, if I was going to ask you to put language to what you're feeling right now, you might struggle. You might have vocabulary to describe what was going on in your life. Understanding, naming, and managing our own feelings. And that means not projecting your feeling on somebody else, not blaming somebody else for how you feel, growing in maturity around insight about your feelings. It might be breaking free from self-destructive patterns. You might have patterns in your life that you keep doing, like Paul says. You know, I find myself wanting to do one thing, but I keep doing something else. I keep doing the wrong thing. I keep making the same bad choices. Being aware of how our past impacts our present. What's gone on before in your life will have an impact on your life now. We need to recognize that correlation, allow God in to bring his healing and transformation. Developing the capacity to express our thoughts and feelings. Getting that vocabulary so we can speak clearly about how we're feeling, about what's going on, about reflecting on our lives. Initiating and maintaining close and meaningful relationships. That's a hallmark of good inner life. If you can relate to people well, if you can maintain relationships well, if you don't blow relationships up with your stuff, that's a hallmark of emotional maturity. Respecting and loving others without having to change them. Our job isn't to change other people. Our main focus is ourselves. We're always the project. We're the one that God is doing the work on. And so when we focus on ourselves and we allow God to change us, when we become the best version of who we are, then you're the best gift to somebody else. If you want to be a great friend to someone, a great son or a daughter to someone, a great brother or sister to someone, a great work colleague to someone, the best gift you can be to them is to allow God to do the work on you, to be the best version of who you are, because then that will transform your relationships. Another biggie, learning to resolve conflict maturely. Most of us aren't good at conflict. We aren't good at dealing with conflict or the pain that comes from conflict. But again, if we tend the inner life, we can do conflict much better. You are going to get hurt in life. You are going to have disagreements in life. Things are going to happen to you. You're going to experience pain. You're going to experience conflict. Learning to resolve it maturely and well, again, is a really key part of having an integrated inner and outer life. And not bringing all those unpaid bills. You know, not taking the pain from 10 years ago and projecting onto the person in front of you. Learning to resolve conflict maturely. Grieving well, a really key part of emotional health. Learning to grieve well, to learn to again, to understand the emotional pain of grief and working with that and processing that. And again, you could add your own things to this list. You could add your own thing to the list of what you think emotional health looks like for you. So one of the key ways we can develop our inner life is through what's called contemplative spirituality. Contemplation, taking time to stop and to reflect and to think and allow God into our life. It's been used throughout history for Christians to really develop their interior life. Brother Lawrence called it the pure loving gaze that finds God everywhere. So having that awareness that whatever we're going through, God is right there with us and seeing God in that thing. Francis de Sales described it as the mind's loving, unmixed, permanent attention to the things of God. Again, having that God awareness in all the stuff that we're going through. So contemplation, stopping, slowing, can help us deepen our relationship with God, help us experience a better quality of life, and really tend to our inner lives. So how often do you stop and just take time? How often do you pause and allow God to speak to you? How aware are you of God in all things? How often do you see God in your everyday life? Are you aware of his presence and his voice? Because that contemplation doesn't only change us, it also changes the way that we are towards other people. It changes our awareness of seeing God in other people, our awareness of seeing God in different situations. So we don't just see people through our eyes, which often are quite critical, quite judgy, if we're honest. We start to see people through the eyes of the Lord. We start to see people as God sees them. And that changes the way we relate to those around us. So our relationship with God and our relationship with people are kind of integrated together in the same way as our inner and outer life are. A loving union with God results in a loving union with people. It changes the way that we see those around us. It says in 1 John, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Fairly straightforward language there. If you claim to love God and yet you hate a brother or sister, well, you don't love God. For whoever does not love their brother and sister who they have seen cannot love God who they haven't seen. So John's saying there should be this outflow from your life, that a union with God results in this loving union with people around you. And we end up with something a little bit like this, an integrated kind of model for interior and exterior life. Loving God well, loving others well, loving yourself well, and then within that, your emotional health, supported by this contemplative spirituality, this stopping and slowing and reflecting and giving time to tend your interior life. And living integrated lives like this, it does help us slow down a little bit. It does help us stop and reflect. Christians tend towards activity, particularly evangelical or charismatic Christians. We want to do something. Charles Spurgeon said, brethren, do something, do something, do something. You know, there's that underlying sense, if you're a Christian, you need to be doing something. You need to be tending towards activity, because activity is good. Activity, we're making a difference for God. But our greatest strength can often be our greatest weakness. We might excel in activity, we might excel in serving, we might excel in mobilizing people, but at the same time, we're not giving time to pay attention to ourselves in the midst of that. And if we're so active all the time, and you keep drawing from that well, then sometimes you haven't got anything left. As I said last week, something can happen, something can push you or trigger you, and you can find yourself reacting in a very strange way to a very simple situation, because there's nothing inside to draw from. There's no reserve of grace and love for the situation you're facing. So slowing down, paying attention to our inner life is a key part of emotional health, and we're going to talk more about that in the weeks ahead. The story of famous story in Luke 10, which many of you are familiar with. Two people, Mary and Martha. Let's read it this morning. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. So off the bat here, it isn't about one being right and one being wrong. It's about two different approaches to Christian life. Martha is actively serving Jesus, actively hosting Jesus. But she's missing Jesus in that process. She's missing the presence of Jesus at the same time as she's serving him. She's busy in the doing of life. And really that's what we excel at as church. And we excel at doing. We excel at the serving. Now Mary might have been a bit lazy. Who knows? She might have been trying to dodge work. But in doing that, in sitting at Jesus' feet, something was happening for her. She wasn't distracted by the activity. She was sitting there, and somehow her inner life was being built up. She's engaging with Jesus. She's stopping, being intimate and attentive, still before him. And she's a model of that still life, that life that comes to stillness in front of Jesus. She slowed down to focus on Jesus. And we don't know the backstory between Mary and Martha, but we do know that Jesus uses them as a symbol to say, actually, at this point, she's chosen the better thing. She's chosen the better thing, because to be still before me actually is the one thing that's needed. There's lots of things that are going to get your attention. There's lots of things that you've on your to-do list you feel you need to do, but actually at this moment, I'm the most important thing here. And she's chosen that, and it won't be taken from her. So, who would say they are more of a Martha? Those are the honest people. I'd say 95% of the room are Marthas, if we're honest, in reality. Because that's what the culture we're in, the way we tend to be, We like to be active. We like to be serving. We like to be doing. The issue can be, if we don't get a balance between our inner life and our outer life, we have this sense of feeling off center. We feel a little bit like something's not quite right. So you can do for God and still not feel like it's not quite right. Something feels wrong, something feels off. I'm not great at stopping and stilling. I'm an activist. I love to do stuff. I love to achieve stuff. I love to fix stuff. I love to see things done. That's kind of the way I'm wired. I like to see progress. I like to see things achieved. I like to see us moving forward. And this can get in the way of me slowing down. It can get in the way of me stopping and tending my inner life. You know, I can be a little bit like these scales. I can be heavy on activity and light on contemplation. I think a lot of us can find ourselves a little bit like this. We like to see things done. We like to see progress. We like to see things achieved. It makes us feel good. But we can feel out of kilter with the time we take to stop and still ourselves and reflect, pay attention to our emotions, and listen to what God is saying. Now, the good news is God doesn't give up on me. He doesn't just say, that's you, Simon, you're just an activist. That's the way you are. He doesn't give up on me. He doesn't give up on you. He's always whispering to me. He's always encouraging me. He's always nudging me and saying, why don't you just take a bit of time out? Why don't you pause? Why don't you stop? Why don't you reflect? Why don't you resist the temptation to do something, to check your list, to answer another email? He's always whispering to me and encouraging me to come aside and spend some time tending my inner life. Do I always respond to that whisper? No, I don't. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's easier to push into activity than to go and spend time with God. If I go and spend time with God, he might bring something up that I'm not very comfortable with. So much easier to answer a couple more emails. Much easier to stay in an area where I do feel comfortable, I do feel in control. And so I've got that battle, like we all have. Do I stop? Do I pause? Do I take time to come aside to stillness with God and allow him to tend my inner life? See, God is relentlessly pursuing you and me. It's not about us relentlessly pursuing God. There was a book years ago called God Chasers. I think got the whole thing the wrong way around. God is the one chasing after us. God is the one pursuing us. God is the one inviting us into this deeper life. It says in Ephesians 3, he calls us to understand how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. That's an invitation from God to you and me to understand just the fullness of God's love in our lives. And the more we know this love, the more it anchors us in this culture, in this sea of all that's going on around us. All these voices trying to tell you, this is the way you're accepted, this is the way you have value, this is the way you have identity. It's the inner work with God that really gives us that security, that anchor in the storm. We each have a person within us that needs nurturing. Brennan Manning, I want to finish with this quote. It's always true to some extent that we make our images of God. It is even truer that our image of God makes us. Eventually, we become like the God we image. Healing our image of God heals our image of ourselves. God wants to come and put an image of himself within you that is true to his character, true to how he sees you, how he feels about you, how he loves you.
Lord, you have my heart, and I will serve.